It's story time with the Histories, with your hosts, Matt Marine and Jen Dumas.
Presented by Anchor FM.
Hey everybody, this is your host Jen Dumas along with fellow host Matt Breen, and you are listening to Storytime with the Histories, the podcast focused on world history stories that are sometimes bizarre, often entertaining, and always factual. Today we have an episode we have added to our Strategy of Tension series based on the events that have occurred at the start of 2026. Quite a start to begin the year.
Yeah,
The
it's
US
been a lot.
Oh, it has been a lot. The U.S. is engaging in military incursions and diplomatic interventions in Venezuela and Cuba, respectively. And these actions have been justified under what has been called, as of this recording, either the Trump Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine or the Trump Doctrine. So we decided we needed to get a little bit more into the history of the Monroe Doctrine.
Yeah. I mean, initially we had planned that we were just going to close things out. We were going to hit up Chile and finish out where we were at. But obviously, events over the last couple of months really forced our hand in some ways to add this episode in. And so, it just felt like the right place to add in some context, especially given the fact that the administration has justified a lot of its actions, saying, hey, this is just the Monroe Doctrine in the 21st century.
Exactly.
So for this episode, we cobbled together a variety of sources. We have them kind of like in the show notes displayed out by the different sections of the episode itself. For the Monroe Doctrine, we utilized a legal scholar article called Denaturalizing the Monroe Doctrine, the Rise of Latin American Legal Anti-Imperialism in the Face of Modern U.S. and Hemispheric Redefinition of the Monroe Doctrine. That's a mouthful. By Juan Pablo Scarfi.
That's like a master's thesis or PhD, pretentious thesis.
It read like it too. It was very interesting, but it was voluminous, just like the title of the article itself. When we hop into the Roosevelt Corollary, we looked at a couple sources, including Closing the American Wilderness by Ansel Adams from American Experience. Then we jumped into the State Department's records. We did this previously with the Patrice Lumumba series. In this one, we looked at the Milestone Documents collection for the Roosevelt Corollary and the Office of the Historian within the State Department's website. Their records from 1899 to 1913. And then we also had a variety of sources to flesh things out as well.
Do you know why I'm really excited about this podcast, besides the fact that the content's really cool? Is my $60,000 master's degree is finally paying off.
There it is. I mean,
for a 40-minute podcast, we finally made it worth my while.
Do you want to date yourself on the pod? How long ago did you begin work on said master's degree?
Oh God, 27 years ago.
Hey, look, I mean, all good things. All good
Finished
things.
Finished it 25 years ago.
It's like it's like beverages made in European countries. It takes time for them to prove.
And I do want to say, at the time, I was one of the few who were getting their master's in Latin American history to begin with, and especially 20th century Latin American foreign policy. But now I feel I'm justified because mine actually still applies.
That's it.
As opposed to 19th century European, whatever it may have been.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, because upon his reelection in 2025, President Donald Trump has begun really a robust policy of pressure and military action in Latin America. These events first started in terms of action in September of 2025 with the extrajudicial killings of people the administration claimed were drug smugglers. Do you remember that?
I do.
All across the Caribbean.
Yep.
Diplomatic pressure has also been applied to a variety of Central and South American, Latin American countries. Tariff threats, specifically against Mexico and their potential support of Cuba, where there has been an uptick in diplomatic pressure in 2026. And then just a lot of cooperation in a way that we haven't really seen between Latin American governments and the United States this century. There's definitely been an alteration of those patterns. All of these preceded the attacks that started to take place at the end of 2025. The big attack, though, came January 3rd, 2026 in Venezuela. where a military incursion occurred and resulted in the kidnapping of President Nicolas Maduro. That was subsequently followed by a blockade of Cuba and a use of sanctions and tariff threats to destroy the Cuban energy economy.
Yep.
Yeah. These actions are an extension of three existing foreign policy or militaristic doctrines of intervention. The main one, obviously, is the Monroe Doctrine, which would include the Roosevelt Corollary, and we're going to get into all of that. There's also the utilization, though, of the Truman Doctrine, specifically with regards to Venezuela and Cuba. This would be containing the spread of communism, and then the Bush Doctrine, which, to quote a post from PBS.org, the Bush Doctrine was America will exploit its military and economic power to encourage, quote unquote, free and open societies.
We could write a book called Monroe Doctrine Through the Centuries.
Yeah, I know. This America and its doctrines.
Right.
The Bush Doctrine is definitely the most interventionist of these three
Oh, yeah.
doctrines, even when you consider the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. And this is the Global War on Terror, or GWAT. That's what you would see that referred to in the press or something like that. Now, the Trump Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, or the Trump Doctrine, is the use of foreign policy where pressure and the use of military might can be applied both to adversaries and potentially to allies. And as of this recording right now, we're also seeing a use of the Trump Doctrine in Iran and in Middle Eastern affairs. There just seems to be this clear interventionist shift taking place within the foreign policy space, but no place has it been more clearly defined than in Latin America.
Oh, totally.
Right. And, ostensibly all of these doctrines, whether it be the Monroe, the Bush, the Truman, or potentially what might be called eventually the Trump Doctrine, all of these present something of a legal and logical paradox, because while the United States has spent a lot of its time and effort in the American century trying to expand the democratic realm and capitalistic realm of geopolitics in the global economy, there is something that's sort of interesting at play here. And I think that this might best be glimpsed within the Trump Corollary or doctrine that we just discussed, because this, interventionist militaristic stance has drawn into sharp focus a legal and logical paradox regarding U.S. foreign policy in the 20th and 21st centuries. During the so-called American century, the United States has positioned itself as a defender of a rules-based order, and the foundation of which has been a commitment to democracy, human rights, economic self-determinism, and free trade, all the things that made up our childhoods and adult lives.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Now, within the American century, we can also see that there has been a sharp rise in U.S. imperialism and intervention on the global stage regarding geopolitics, really beginning in the 1890s. The constant justification of interventionism, something that has been heretofore out of the norm for the United States, going back to Washington's farewell address and his plea for America to not become entangled in foreign events, has always been that the U.S. is spreading its liberal values, right? This is why we intervene. This is why we go overseas. The paradox, though, as outlined in the Denaturalizing the Monroe article that we talked about before, is this. And now I'm going to quote the author Scarfy here. The U.S. performs as a global promoter of human rights, values, and humanitarian interventions, as if these were an extension of its values writ large, while at the same time resisting compliance with these same international legal standards. So when we think about it, the Monroe Doctrine, which is at the centerpiece of everything that we've talked about so far regarding interventionism, really has to do with this idea of both spreading American values of self-determination and democracy and respecting norms and rule-based order, while at the same time using coercive violence to achieve American goals, and really undermines the idea of or notion of national sovereignty. And sovereignty is just defined as the supreme, absolute, and uncontrollable power or authority of a state to govern itself, make its own laws, and manage its own affairs. So when we think about it, the paradox here really, identified in this article really does hold true, and no times more so than now. We want to say that we want to create a more free and safe and better world. But in order to do that, we're going to undermine every other country in this hemisphere, it would seem, to achieve that, which clearly seems antithetical to our overall goals and values.
Well, yeah, and really, when we think about the Monroe Doctrine, it's, I know it goes against what Washington said with entangling alliances and staying, neutral in world affairs. And I think the reason the Monroe Doctrine comes about when it does, like around 1823, is because I think the United States was finally solid in its own beliefs domestically, like felt pretty solid domestically, and then, of course, wanted to turn outward, and with this idea that after the Latin American revolutions for independence, which the United States widely supported, the message to Europe was this: stay out. Like, don't try to recolonize this area now that you've lost it. This is, quote, our backyard. And, when Monroe did this in 1823, that's really what it was. It was this idea that Europe was going to stay out of our backyard and we were going to stay out of Europe's backyard. We were going to be totally fine and ignore all the stuff, or at least not get involved in their colonial affairs in the Eastern Hemisphere, and they weren't going to get involved in our affairs in the Western colonial hemisphere. And I get that. Like, I'm not. That itself is that's what happened back then. It doesn't make it right, but that's what happened back then. And so it grows out of the attempts to undermine the anti-interventionist stance, right?
Yeah.
And so the Monroe Doctrine basically does claim an anti-colonial and anti-interventionist position, right? That Latin America has a right to rule itself and it has the right to make its own laws, and Europe better not try to intervene with that. But at the same time, it does really create a sphere of influence. I wasn't there, but Monroe clearly states, like, it's very clear that he is telling Europe, this is the United States arena and stay out. Okay. And it's more for the benefit of the United States, I think, than really anybody else.
Yeah, I think your read on that is correct. I know there was a lot of upstart European powers, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, who were looking to get into the colonial game during this time period, the early stages of imperialism across 19th century European history, really starting to peak out during this time. And I think your read on that is correct. Yeah.
And it just, and it really does. It becomes the basis of our foreign policy for what, like 200 plus years. Right?
Yep, pretty much right up until World War I.
Yeah, like it is. And like you said, it's providing the foundation for the policies that we're even seeing today. And I think, once we do the Monroe Doctrine, then it becomes imperative for the United States, at least the United States leadership at the time. Well, how do we make sure that this sticks? And then, we've got the Mexican-American War that's going to lead to further territory in the southern part of North America. And then once we do that, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and then we get other territories, and it just makes the connection to the rest of Central America and Latin America so much closer for the United States, which then even gives them more impetus to have control in that region.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, right? Because the whole idea of the doctrine, as it was laid out by both Monroe, like the president of the United States at the time, but also his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, was that not only would we try to now you've got me saying,
yeah, see, there you go.
yeah, I know. Not only would the United States try to keep the Europeans out, but there would also be this like anti-colonial bend to the doctrine as well. But as you just pointed out, both with the annexation of Texas and specifically the Mexican-American War, imperialism definitely is justified under the doctrine. And of course, that only gets supercharged in 1893 with the closing of the American West and the end of the, like, air quotes, free real estate system of the United States. And for those who don't know, in 1893, historian Frederick Jackson Turner presented his thesis, The Significance of the Frontier in the American History, at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, in which he concluded that the closing of the Western frontier in North America also ended the first period of American history. And this first period really had been defined by the, again, quote unquote, rugged individualism, the hardships of converting the West and settling Western lands into something more habitable, had
Mm-hmm.
created more American strength and resourcefulness and self-reliance in the West in particular. And, really out of the West, that's where American democracy is fostered. It's an
Mm-hmm.
insurgency from the West back to the East that creates the diplomatic sphere of American politics. But at the same time, the westward expansion that occurred throughout the 19th century also was the realization of the Jeffersonian dream of a nation of small farmers and agrarianism. And it was a really good way of achieving liberty, which at this time period was really just defined by one's ability to gain and retain
Yeah.
property in land,
Yeah.
most notably. And so as long as you have all this land out in the West, you can just continue to go out and out and out and out and out and take that land from Native American people or Mexico, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
But when the West gets closed and that first period of American history ends, the settling of the Western lands really closes off also this pressure release valve, creates a lot of anxiety, and presents a limitation now on the natural resources that the United States can use for economic expansion as well. And this is during the
Yep.
period of the Second Industrial Revolution and the massive laissez-faire Gilded Age economy of the 1880s and 1890s. So there's a lot of apprehension. So where does America go? Well, if you're looking for more land, if you're looking for more free real estate, why don't you just start looking beyond your borders, start looking overseas? And it turns out that there was a whole lot more free real estate resources and people to steal it from existing all across the planet. But the United States really started to turn its attention to the Pacific Ocean.
Oh, totally. And again, it's true because with the Gilded Age, we have overproduction because you only make money when you mass produce and mass produce and mass produce and mass produce. And you only have so many raw materials, like you said, in your country. You only have so many markets in your country, right? And so if you want to continue to make money in this new industrial process, you have to find more resources and markets elsewhere. And like you said, the Pacific was one of the first places they wanted to go. And specifically, we're talking right away with China and Japan. And
Dude, those are like your babies.
I know, I'm so
right there.
excited to talk about this. So
Well,
with
excited to talk about them, not excited
not
to talk
excited about the topic, but
Yeah.
it's just the content itself is
qualifier here. Yeah, we got to
yeah.
have a qualifier here. Yeah.
I love Chinese and Japanese history. It fascinates me. So Japan, they're going to go to in 1853 with Commodore Matthew Perry, not of the Friends variety. And he shows up on Japanese shores with, his little military, not little, his big military behind them.
The
and
Black Fleet, right?
Yeah,
the
right.
Black
And-
Fleet.
yeah, quite big, and wants to make special trade arrangements between Japan and the United States. And they want really specifically probably coaling stations. They want special rights for whaling in the Pacific. And at first, Japan's like, no.
No, they'd been pretty famously closed off.
Yeah, Tokugawa shogunate and the Tokugawa laws, like nobody from Japan can move to another place. And if you lived in a place abroad from Japan, you're not supposed to come back. They wanted to be like this self-sufficient, isolated state to preserve the quality or the pureness of Japanese culture. Okay. And so at first when they say no, Perry Cosen's like, you know what? Okay, but we'll be back in a year, and we're really hoping you have a different answer.
Could
so they
you
come.
be any more closed off? I
Yeah,
couldn't
right.
resist. I'm sorry.
It's so great. And then he comes back in a year, and it becomes really evident quite early on to the Tokugawa shogunate that there is no way that they are going to be able to compete with this gunboat diplomacy.
No.
That if they weren't going to open willingly, they were going to be forced open by the United States. And so
So
then you have
hold on real quick.
Yeah, go.
That term you just said, gunboat diplomacy. Say more about that. What is that?
Oh, so gunboat diplomacy it's really that whole idea of, and we'll get a little bit later on, but most people are familiar with Teddy Roosevelt's, speak softly and carry a big stick.
Mhm,
And it's this idea that you try to negotiate first, but if negotiation and diplomacy fails, then you simply use the threat of military power, and then usually you'll get your way.
Man, weird. That sounds like something we were talking about. I just can't put my finger on that.
I know,
That sounds
right?
really weird to me. I think we've heard that one before.
And it does work because the Tokugawa shogunate signs the Treaty of Kanagawa. It gives special trading rights to the United States. Japan is now open for business. Now,
They
Japan,
also committed cultural suicide
they
to
did.
facilitate all of
That
this.
they totally did. But they will the one thing that's really interesting is it's gonna usher in the age of the Meiji Restoration, which is the modernization of Japan, which is then gonna dictate their foreign policy for the first half of the 20th century.
And we got a whole series on that one. Remember our
Yeah.
Russo-Japanese War one? Yeah, we got a whole episode on that.
And then the United States doesn't stop at Japan. They want some, involvement with China. Now, China had already been opened up with Britain and the Opium Wars.
Yeah, which
And
also we have an episode on that
oh my
one, the
God, I
Heimler.
know,
Yeah,
right?
look at
I
all
mean,
the ground we're
there.
covering.
Look at this
Yeah.
connection. And so, Britain had already had a sphere of influence with China, and then France got a little bit involved, and Russia gets a little bit involved. And the United States does not want to lose out on China because it's such a huge market. It's not really the place for resources for them, but it is a huge market for any kind of manufactured products. And so, John Jay goes and does the open door policy where he's like, hey, China should be open for everyone. And this idea that everybody should have equal rights to trade in the sphere of influence, or at least have a region of China to be a special sphere of influence, regardless of, whether it's Britain or France or whoever else, United States included. And then that way that China would be hopefully a huge importer of American products. But again, it's the same thing. Britain was able to open up China through military force, right, in the Opium Wars, and then pretended to do diplomacy in helping the Chinese people. And France is going to get in on that, and Russia's going to get in on that, and the United States is going to get in on that. And so now the United States has economic influence in Japan, economic influence in China, and then also the threat of military intervention, especially in Japan, if things go south for the United States. So this policy that we're seeing in the 21st century, this is nothing new to the United States. This is just how we rolled.
Yeah,
Not that it's okay.
totally. And
Yeah.
right on the verge of the 20th century, the United States flexes even harder with the Spanish-American War in 1898, which really builds upon these patterns of gunboat diplomacy and just outright taking. Now, the Spanish-American War, admittedly, it's a big topic, so we're gonna have to
No, it is
yada
big.
yada a little bit of this. In short, after a mysterious explosion on the battleship USS Maine, which was anchored in Havana Harbor, killed 268 sailors, the United States entered into a war with the declining, or maybe at this point, just dead
Dead.
Spanish
Yes.
Empire.
There's no decline in that anyway.
Yeah, I think they've declined all the way into the grave. The slogan for this war, which was ginned up by yellow journalists, and yellow journalism, as a reminder, it's a sensational journalistic style deployed in the circulation wars between Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal. This style of journalism used scare headlines, lavish pictures and cartoons, fake interviews. I know this is
Interesting.
all sounding so
Sounds a
familiar
lot
to
like
me.
social media today.
It's weird. Hyperbole to create extreme emotional reactions amongst readers and consumers.
No.
This is nuts. In short, yellow journalism, it's not responsible or good journalism. I guess some things just
Never change.
Yeah. But anyway, these yellow journalists gin up support with a slogan that read, quote, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain."
Now,
You
can,
know,
can I didn't the Maine explode because they had some kind of like volatile gunpowder in there that was prone
no
to
one know. I mean,
spontaneous combustion?
still causes unknown. It could have been, a powder storage accident. That's a speculation. Of course, the United States believed that Spanish saboteurs operating in Cuba, which was under the one of the crown jewels of Spain in the West, did this. There's no clear cause for this. There's some speculation that maybe it was an inside job. That's very
Oh, interesting.
strategy of tensiony.
Wow.
But the reality is, no one real. As far as I know, I have not seen any definitive proof, and I don't know if there ever will be any
Right.
definitive
Too late
proof.
now.
Yeah. So the United States, after declaring war in 1898, pursued a naval and land-based conflict in the Caribbean, the Philippines, and the Southern Pacific. Seems like the United States kind of wanted to add on to that Asiatic
Oh, yeah.
empire that you said they were forming, and achieved pretty overwhelming victories in each of these theaters of war, the end of results of which was the U.S. imperialization or sovereignty over
Mhm.
Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines in the South Pacific, as well as the formation of a protectorate over Cuba. The American empire really and truly now is formed, and
Yeah.
all
Oh,
that
totally.
apprehension and fear over the closure of the West was gone. And in fact, in celebration of this new empire, a famous cartoon was printed and run across a variety of different newspaper platforms called 10,000 Miles from Tip to Tip. We've included the cartoon in the show notes for anybody who wants to see it. The creation of this empire also created the conditions for the United States to now become the dominant power in Latin America.
Mhm.
Like you pointed out, the Monroe Doctrine had effectively pushed the British, but also the Holy Alliance powers that we mentioned before, and now the Spanish, the Spanish-American War
Mhm.
out of Latin America. This now, for all intents and purposes, the Western Hemisphere is now the American domain or sphere of influence, right?
Yeah, that 10,000 miles tip to tip is I'm just getting this visual of Cecil Rhodes standing tip to tip of Africa.
It's pretty much the same thing, but this time it's a bald eagle flying out of a sun that looks suspiciously like the rising sun of Japan that was,
Interesting.
popularized in the 1930s and 40s. And then there's a banner of stars, of course.
Of
And
course.
the United States eagle is standing on the continental United States, but the wingtips stretch over into both Europe and Asia,
Well, that'll
across
give
both the
Sea to
Atlantic
Shining Sea a
and
new
yeah,
take.
exactly. Your coast, not our coast.
Yeah, right, right. And it's funny is it's not funny, it's actually sad, but with the Spanish-American War, I mean, the United States would say that we were there to protect Cuba. We're trying to help Cuba get independence from and don't get me wrong, Spain was nasty, but we
Mhm.
weren't trying to help get Cuban independence. Anyway, so it's beginning of the 20th century, 1900s, we basically have domain now in Latin America, in the Western Hemisphere. And then we're going to add a little something new to the Monroe Doctrine, because
New
why not?
spice. Got
A little new
you got to
spice.
update. Everybody,
It is
every now
it's
and
like
then you
this
got to have the
bowl
new
of foreign
Coke.
policy. Oh God,
Yeah, new
do
recipe.
not new Coke is not okay. That should never be used as an analogy. That's the grossest thing. That's right up there with Pepsi Zero. That's vile too.
Remember Crystal Pepsi? We can't do this. I know we've already done this too. This is definitely on
Was
one of our.
Crystal Pepsi the white one?
It was a clear one.
Was
It
that
was
supposed
good.
to make us think it was more healthy for us?
It was like Sprite, but it tasted like Pepsi.
That's disgusting.
It was
No, we
delicious.
can't. Okay, we got to stay focused. We got to stay focused. So, Roosevelt Corollary, which is not the Coke Zero of anything or Pepsi Zero. So basically, this comes in with TR, and we know TR. Like we said, he's the speak softly, carry a big stick. And what was happening at the beginning of the 20th century is there were a lot of Latin American nations who had borrowed money from Europe, right, to build up their nation, their state, as any country does. We have countries borrowing from other countries all
Yeah.
over the time. But some Latin American states were struggling with paying the loans back. And the European nations, Germany being one of them, are like, hey, we're not going to love it if you can't pay the loan back. We might have to come in and have a little business with you. And TR was like, oh, hell no. Okay, right? Monroe Doctrine, this is our hemisphere. You don't get involved. And so in 1904, he creates this Roosevelt Corollary. And basically what it was is basically what he said is this is like whatever debts the European countries owe to Europe, okay, we will get involved in getting those debts paid back. But if you so much as step foot in the Western Hemisphere, the United States is ready to go with our military, and we are not going to back down. Okay. And
Are
again, this is
we
that.
attacking the Europeans or are we attacking the Latin Americans?
Well, it depends. It's if the Latin Americans were willfully not paying back their loan, we were going to get involved to make sure they paid back their loan. But it was more military intervention against the European powers if they decided to step over the side into our backyard.
Okay, so some classic Monroe Doctrine sort of
It's
stuff there.
totally classic, right?
But
And-
this is more aggressive.
Oh, this is very aggressive. This is basically saying if you step foot in our backyard, we're willing to go to war.
Okay.
That's what this really is. And then with Venezuela, oh God, poor Venezuela.
His,
Poor Venezuela.
dude, like I know you're a big fan of this one, right? Like history doesn't repeat itself, but it
Oh my
rhymes.
God. I'm like, oh. So poor Venezuela. Okay. So Venezuela is independent, right? Gets its independence with the Latin American Revolution. And there's an issue over some property rights in Venezuela. And there's all kind of talks about credit debates, whether the country should get money, there's national liberation movements. There's just a lot going on in Venezuela that was concerning European powers and the United States as well. It was concerning European powers because they wanted their money back. It was concerning the United States because they were worried the European powers were going to get involved in the Western Hemisphere.
Okay.
So
I see this forming. Okay.
yeah, right? And so he creates a corollary, right? He wants to convince European states, who he obviously does not want in the Western Hemisphere, right, that the U.S. would ensure all Latin American countries would fulfill their financial obligations to their international creditors and that they would maintain basically favorable economic relationships. So basically, the United States will make sure Latin America pays back the money it owes. That's what it's saying. In some way,
the United States is like the collector.
Yeah, right. Like, don't worry, we
Like
got
for the
this.
mafia guys,
We
like a
got this,
shakedown
yeah.
sort of thing. Okay.
Right. It is. It's kind of like that. They're like, we're going to be calling the Latin American countries 24/7 to make sure they're paying back their monthly payment or whatever it may be, which is actually kind of, anyway, long story.
I can see the
It is. I can't.
the
I'm going to get
flashbacks of your dissertation.
it is. I can't get too much into it. It's too long. Anyway, here's where we're going a little step further with the militarism, right? So Roosevelt, and he honestly believed this. He was one of those presidents who believed the president could do whatever they wanted as long as he thought it was for the welfare of the American people.
Wait, what?
You know that?
Man, I just
Oh
feel
my
like
God,
there's like
do you
an
not hear
echo
this?
in this
It's like an
podcast.
echo
There's something
chamber.
echo in this podcast.
Good God.
I don't get it.
And so he kind of makes the United States out as the international police power, right? That the United States is justified in using military intervention or action as a way to create conditions that would maintain peace in Latin America. That's kind of what he's saying, right?
Yeah.
Peace as in keeping the Europeans out. That's our definition.
Gotcha.
And again, we go back to that paradox that's outlined by Scarfi and the irony that we're trying to protect American values, or what we feel is the good, not we, I wasn't there, values of the United States, democracy and peace and economic freedom, yet we're doing it in a distinctly undemocratic, unfreedom, unpeaceful way.
Yeah, totally. And this pretextual sort of system that you just described under the Roosevelt Corollary, what was set up here, was applied almost immediately. What we could call like the new Monroe Doctrine was used to create the Panama Canal, which is a huge engineering undertaking, but also one of the major elements of American power in Latin America through the course of the 20th century. So essentially, the Panama Canal project was first kind of imagined. This is right around the time of the American system's explosion in the United States and canal building writ large across the world.
Right.
The first attempts at creating a canal in Latin America occurred in 1850 when the United States and the British negotiated a treaty called the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty. It was basically just a joint venture to create a canal in Nicaragua, but it never went beyond the planning stages.
Yeah.
France, though, did succeed in beginning a canal, this one being built in the Isthmus of Panama. These efforts started in 1880. It was the same sort of like massive project that France had undertaken in the Suez Canal in Egypt.
May I interject just for 1 second about this?
Yes,
So we had the French and the Suez Canal, which the British will eventually take over, and the French will lose control. And we're about to see the same thing happen
100%.
in Latin America. What is France doing wrong? Why can't they keep control of their canals?
That's a whole season of what is France doing wrong is like the side podcast.
Right, I
for
know.
this. Yeah, because you're right. France has to abandon their efforts in 1889 after they go bankrupt, largely because 20,000 people died. And
No, it does happen.
Yeah, they're just paying a ton of money and didn't really work out. However, the United States, lurking in the background, swoops in 1901. After they negotiate a new treaty called the Hay-Pont-à-Faux Treaty. 'Cause it wouldn't be an episode without
And if you
me
didn't
just
mispronounce
not
something.
stepping all over somebody's name. All right, which in 1901 was negotiated to continue the French Canal. Now, the negotiations were taking place between the Colombian government, which controlled the Isthmus of Panama during this time period, and the American government. And the asking price for Colombia in terms of like how much was going to be paid to the government for the construction fees, all that sort of stuff, was too steep for the liking of your boy, Teddy Roosevelt.
Well, yeah, but because we only offered what, 10 million?
Yeah, we lowballed them for sure.
And for those of us those of you who don't understand the value of the Panama Canal, the impact it would have on shipping and trading as it connected the Pacific and Atlantic is instrumental. Like, it's huge.
Yeah, we were going to pay $10 million up front and then like a $250,000 annuity payment every year after that. Yeah, so we're basically asking. You got me doing this now.
I know.
The United States is basically asking for the moon. Colombia says no. Roosevelt says like, hey, good thing we've got this mint policy that I just created, the corollary that you outlined, which justified some sort of military incursion, this time to advance global trade and economics. That paradox, there it is, the Scarfy paradox, right? So we're going to step on somebody else's sovereignty, but we're going to do it for the embetterment of the global economy. So the United States essentially positions warships utilizing gunboat diplomacy by stationing warships on both the Pacific and Caribbean side of the isthmus, and forces the Venezuelans to basically back down. The United States is able to gain control of the canal zone and foments the conditions necessary for Panamanian independence, right? So they just break away an entire region of the country. The canal was re-begun in 1904 and completed in 1914, just in time for World War I.
Now, I will give a shout out to the U.S. Like, I'm not sure we were 100%. We knew there were conflicts in Europe. I don't think we thought it was going to break out into the war it did in 1914. Still no excuse for their behaviors, but it did benefit us again in the long. I wasn't there in the long run.
The United States was able to move goods and
all
resources from the West Coast to the East Coast more efficiently
money. Yep.
Exactly. Making money, trading with whomever needed those guns and bullets and cannons, etc.
Hey, at least that gave, it's not technical neutrality, but at least we were willing to sell and make money off everybody in a war stance, and we didn't quite take a side yet.
Not yet. And, people such as like the DuPonts and Dow Chemical and everybody was super excited for this. Right. Now, lest you think that the United States was all about guns and hard power, there was also another type of diplomacy that started to emerge during this time period, specifically again in Latin America, that took on a little bit more of that economic flavor, right?
It's all about the money with dollar diplomacy. And this was by Taft, right? President William Howard Taft. And what he wanted was more to improve U.S. business opportunities and business interests in Latin America. Okay. And the policy, let us not, we got to give props to whoever gets props. The policy was created by the founder of the U.S. steel conglomerate. What a shocker. And then Secretary of State Philander Knox.
Oh, man.
There's stunned.
Like these secret architects to this entire
to all of this stuff.
Project. These people whose names we barely know, but who turned out to be bearing a tremendous amount of load across the ages.
It was. And it was just this idea of encouraging Latin American states to welcome American business interests.
Now, this is an audio medium, so the audience can't see your face when you make these faces. We are not a video podcast as of yet. But yeah, it really what it is a nice way of saying that.
We're bribing Latin American governments to allow American business to make money off other people's natural resources.
Now, that's really like squarely in your wheelhouse of your dissertation, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
I think we've got the time for it. Why don't you get a little bit into the weeds on this one?
Okay. So here's the deal. Platt Amendment and everything else, and I don't know if we want to get too much into the Platt Amendment with Cuba, because then I'll be going for hours. But basically, the United Latin America became the U.S. Part 2 in the beginning part of the 20th century. We used as many natural resources from as many different countries as we possibly could to continue American business. We get involved in the Mexican Revolution in 1911 with Porfirio Diaz. We've got the Banana Republics a little bit later on. American businesses basically ran Latin American governments for the first part of the 20th century. And then we wonder why the Latin American countries are like, get out, screw capitalism, we want to be socialist in the latter half of the 20th century.
Right. And this is where you see that like really natural convergence of, with dollar diplomacy and the Roosevelt corollary, those two things coming together and creating this like twin pillar system to hold up the massive weight of the Monroe Doctrine, right?
Yeah.
Because you have these companies going out. This is like a projection of soft power, if you will, taking up the land, the resources, the oil rights, the mineral rights, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then if push comes to shove and Latin American people or governments try to reclaim what is rightfully theirs under the dictates of international law and sovereignty, then the United States government will invoke the Monroe Doctrine, specifically the Roosevelt Corollary, to maintain order and protect the rights of these private companies, just as Roosevelt had planned it out regarding Venezuela and the repayment of loans to creditors. This is like a highly nefarious system of
it's horrible. It's horrible. And again, maintaining peace and order is code word for don't let the people in Latin America actually take back their own land and territories. We have to put down the evil revolts as keeping peace and order, but oh my God, it's terrible. Oh my God, it makes me so mad.
All right. And I think
I have
that's
to let
where
it go
we're
here.
going to pick things up next time, right?
I know.
With not just Chile, but the kickoff event. We've got some good historical context to add on to this from Guatemala. So we'll step foot in that quagmire as well. We'll see what the CIA gets up to in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. As we close this out, we definitely had a lot of fun, kind of winking at history and then at our current moment. But there is a logic to the Trump administration saying that when the United States exercises interventionist military power in Venezuela, when it chooses to use coercive economic and military means against Cuba or Mexico or Honduras, El Salvador, you just name some
name
of
it
these,
seriously.
Ecuador here in February 2026, which has become a targeted country and bombed as well. There is an air of truth, right? I know a lot of people scoff at these things when the Trump administration invokes something from history and says like, no, that's not really what it is. But
this time it is.
There's an honesty here. And we're not saying this with admiration.
No.
I think we have staked out a stance over the course of 50 years that national self-determination, the protection of human rights and economic systems and political systems and social systems that are to the benefit of all are things that we agree with. That being said, it would be unfair to label the current administration liars. This is a historical continuity.
Yep.
Going back to 1823.
You know it. Oh, poor Washington. Do you think he's rolling over in his grave?
Onto those wooden teeth. Or whatever other teeth he's in there. He can't roll over anyway. They bled him out. They desanguinated him. He could have lived like 5 more years.
This is what happens when you let leech be your health care. Isn't that what they did? The leeches and the disco. Anyway, well, everybody, thank you so much for listening once again. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, this episode. Definitely tune in for the next one for this continuation and end of this story. I don't want to see anything else yet. Next episode. Oh, good God.
This is it. This has been living in your head. We've been teasing it out, and now it's time. We're going to get back into it. I'm really excited to hear this one, too, because you get to flex, like we said before, when we finished out the Italian years of lead. This is your realm. You get to flex this thing.
I know, just a little bit.
So real quick before we sign off our podcast, we do have an announcement. We have finally gotten our stuff together and have gotten our podcast out on YouTube. So you can check us out on our YouTube channel, The Historists, where all of our back catalog is available as well. So if you're looking for episodes on a different platform, we're out there as well.
Did everybody just hear my dog agreeing with how
He's so
interesting the
excited.
podcast is?
So excited because we did the plugs. The secret dog producer.
It is.
is
It
very
was really hard to
excited that we did.
train Nuka to do that, but thank God that he got it done at the right time.
Nailed it.
All right, guys. Well, until next time, thank you again for joining us.
Bye.
During the first quarter of the 19th century, besides Mexico, almost every other important colony in Latin America gained independence from its mother country in Europe. However, as this occurred, certain powerful monarchies in Europe threatened to stamp out representative governments if they developed in the old colonies. That was the reason that in 1823, President James Monroe issued his now famous policy statement called the Monroe Doctrine.
I'm Chiquita Banana, and I've come to say bananas have to ripen in a certain way.
What's the purpose of it? Capitalism would not collapse if Grenada remained revolutionary. And Reagan was right. It wasn't a matter of direct resources that you needed from that country. He said, nutmeg is not the question. I mean, that was Grenada's biggest export. We could get perfectly good nutmeg from Africa. You don't need Grenada's nutmeg. So why did they invade Grenada? They invaded Grenada because they were serving notice to the people of the Caribbean and to the people of Latin America and to the people of the world that you cannot drop out of your client state free market system.
To further enhance our national security, my administration will be reclaiming the Panama Canal, and we've already started doing it. Just today, a large American company announced they are buying both ports around the Panama Canal and lots of other things having to do with the Panama Canal and a couple of other canals.